The doctor told me I had only 2 months left to live, so I flew home to spend my final days with my mother. But when I arrived, I found police surrounding her bookstore, a demolition order built on lies, and a powerful businessman willing to destroy anyone who uncovered the truth. What started as my final goodbye became the biggest fight of my life. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, if you knew you only had 2 months left, what would be the very first thing you'd do? And if you enjoy emotional stories packed with twists, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let's begin. The doctor told me I probably had only 2 months left. I still remember the silence that filled the examination room after those words left his mouth. The clock hanging above the door continued ticking as though nothing had changed, yet my entire future had collapsed within a few seconds. I stared at the MRI scans clipped to the illuminated panel on the wall, hoping I had misunderstood him. Instead, the neurologist calmly explained that a rare neurological disorder had progressed faster than anyone expected. Additional testing would continue, but based on everything they had seen so far, my chances were extremely limited. My name is Anastasia Seo. I am 34 years old, and for the past 12 years, I have lived in Vancouver, Canada, building a successful career as an architect. My life revolved around skyscrapers, client meetings, construction sites, and impossible deadlines. Every year, I promised my mother that I would visit more often, and every year another project became my excuse. Now, those excuses no longer mattered. 2 days later, I boarded the earliest flight to Seattle carrying only one suitcase. I wasn't returning to solve unfinished business or repair broken family relationships. I simply wanted to spend whatever time remained with the only parent I had left. During the flight, I replayed countless memories of my childhood. My mother, Grace Seo, had raised me alone after my father passed away when I was 11. She owned a small independent bookstore located in Seattle's historic downtown district. It wasn't a profitable business by modern standards, but she loved it with every part of her heart. She always believed books could help people survive difficult seasons. Ironically, I was now entering the most difficult season of my own life. The plane landed just after noon. The familiar scent of rain greeted me as I stepped outside Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The city looked exactly as I remembered. Gray clouds drifted across the skyline, traffic moved steadily through the streets, and coffee shops overflowed with customers despite the weather. Nothing around me suggested that my world had changed forever. An hour later, my taxi turned onto the narrow street where I had spent my childhood. My heartbeat slowed as familiar buildings appeared one after another. I expected to see my mother's bookstore with its green wooden sign hanging proudly above the entrance. Instead, flashing red and blue lights reflected across nearby windows. The taxi stopped abruptly. Several police vehicles blocked the entire street. Yellow caution tape stretched across the sidewalk. Reporters stood beside television cameras while neighbors gathered behind temporary barricades, whispering among themselves. I quickly paid the driver before stepping onto the sidewalk. Confusion replaced every emotion I had carried home. People weren't mourning. They were watching my mother's bookstore. I pushed through the growing crowd until a police officer raised his hand in front of me. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You can't cross this line. That's my mother's bookstore." He glanced toward the building before checking a clipboard. Building inspectors declared the structure unsafe this morning. Emergency demolition has been approved. I stared at him, unable to process what he had just said. Unsafe? That building had survived earthquakes, storms, decades of heavy rain, and countless renovations. My grandfather had personally reinforced most of the foundation years before I was born. None of this made sense. Then I spotted my mother. Grace Seo stood just beyond the police tape speaking with city officials. She wasn't crying. She wasn't arguing either. She looked determined. The moment she noticed me, surprise flashed across her face before she hurried over. "Anastasia?" She wrapped her arms around me tightly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. She didn't know about my diagnosis yet. I hadn't wanted to tell her over the phone. When she finally stepped back, her smile disappeared as she studied my exhausted expression. "You came sooner than expected. I wanted to surprise you. I wish you'd arrived under better circumstances." She glanced toward the bookstore. I followed her eyes. Workers wearing orange safety vests examined the exterior walls while engineers photographed every corner of the building. "They're saying the foundation is failing," she said quietly. "Is it?" "No." Her answer came instantly. "They're lying." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She lowered her voice. "The inspection report is fake." Those words sent a chill through me. "How do you know?" "Because the inspector listed in the report retired 4 years ago." I stared at her. "What?" She reached into her purse and unfolded several official documents. "I checked everything this morning. The signature belonged to someone no longer employed by the city. The engineering license number belonged to another company entirely. Even the photographs attached to the report weren't ours. Someone had submitted inspection images from a completely different building." "This isn't a mistake," my mother whispered. "It's fraud." Before I could respond, a black luxury SUV slowly pulled up across the street. The crowd immediately turned. A tall man stepped out wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. His smile looked polished enough for campaign advertisements. He shook hands with several city officials before speaking briefly with reporters. "Who is he?" I asked. My mother's expression hardened. "Victor Langford." The name meant nothing to me. "He owns Langford Urban Development." She folded the documents carefully. "For the past year, he's been buying every property surrounding this neighborhood." I looked around. Many nearby storefronts displayed construction permits or boarded windows. Only our bookstore appeared untouched. Until today. "He offered to buy this place 6 times, my mother continued. "I refused every offer." "So now." She nodded slowly. "He doesn't want to negotiate anymore." Victor glanced toward us from across the street. For only a brief moment our eyes met. His smile never disappeared. He gave a polite nod as though greeting old friends. Then he climbed back into the SUV and drove away. Something about that expression unsettled me. It wasn't the smile of someone celebrating a business opportunity. It looked like someone checking whether the final piece of a carefully planned operation had fallen into place. As the afternoon faded into evening, city workers postponed the demolition until additional equipment could arrive the following morning. That temporary delay gave my mother one final chance. As we stood together watching the empty bookstore from across the street, she quietly said something I would never forget. "They're not trying to destroy the building." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She kept staring at the bookstore without blinking. "They're trying to erase whatever is inside it." At that moment, I realized returning home wasn't going to be about saying goodbye to my family. It was going to become a fight to uncover a secret someone powerful was willing to destroy an entire neighborhood to keep hidden. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the neurologist repeating the same sentence. 2 months left. Yet somehow, that terrifying diagnosis had become secondary. My thoughts kept returning to the bookstore and my mother's final words before we left. "They're trying to erase whatever is inside it." By 6 o'clock the next morning, I found my mother's bedroom empty. Her phone remained on the nightstand. The kitchen coffee was still warm. She had left in a hurry. At first, I assumed she had gone back to the bookstore, but when I arrived downtown, police officers were still guarding the property. Heavy demolition equipment had lined up along the street, waiting for authorization to begin tearing the building down. My mother wasn't there. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. I called her several times. Straight to voicemail. I drove across the city searching for places she often visited. The neighborhood cafe. The church where she volunteered. The small public library where she held children's reading events. Nothing. Hours passed. Around noon, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. "Come alone. County Records Office. 3rd floor. No signature." I immediately drove there. The County Records Office occupied one of Seattle's oldest government buildings. The interior smelled of old paper, polished wood, and decades of archived history. Employees pushed carts loaded with thick binders through narrow aisles while researchers quietly examined faded documents under bright reading lamps. I hurried upstairs. Near a long table covered with maps, I finally spotted my mother. She wasn't hiding. She was working. Stacks of property records surrounded her. The moment she saw me, relief crossed her face. "I'm sorry," she said. "I couldn't wait. You scared me." "I know." She slid several yellowed maps across the table. "Look." The maps showed downtown Seattle as it had appeared nearly 50 years earlier. Colored boundary lines divided the district into preservation zones. One section immediately caught my attention. "Our bookstore." My mother pointed toward a handwritten notation in the corner. This district was protected by a historical preservation agreement signed decades ago. "If that's true," I said, "they can't legally demolish the building." "Exactly. So, what's the problem?" She sighed. "The agreement has disappeared." I frowned. "What do you mean disappeared?" "I requested the original filing." She pointed toward an empty folder stamped with an official archive number. "The file exists, but every document inside it is gone." I stared at the folder. Someone had removed every page while leaving the archive record itself untouched. A records supervisor approached us, carrying another binder. "I'm sorry," she said politely. "We've searched every storage room. Nothing." She shook her head. "Those documents should be here." But they aren't. After she walked away, my mother leaned closer. "This wasn't random. You think someone removed them?" "I know someone did." She opened another folder containing old newspaper articles. Over the past 18 months, nearly every historic property surrounding the bookstore had quietly lost its protected status. Coincidentally, each property had later been purchased by companies connected to Victor Langford. The pattern became impossible to ignore. One by one, legal protections disappeared. Then ownership changed. Then demolition followed. Our bookstore was simply the last building still standing. I suddenly noticed an elderly maintenance worker sweeping nearby. He had been glancing toward us several times. After looking around to make sure no one else was paying attention, he slowly walked over. "You two are Grace and Anastasia, aren't you?" My mother looked surprised. "Yes." The old man smiled faintly. "I knew your father." "My father?" "He used to visit this building almost every week." I exchanged a confused look with my mother. "My father died years ago." The janitor nodded. "I know. He came here long before that." He lowered his voice. "Your grandfather never trusted government archives." Neither of us spoke. The man reached into his pocket and removed a faded business card. On the back, someone had written a single line in blue ink years ago. "Storage Unit 118. Harbor District." My mother's breathing became noticeably slower. She immediately recognized the handwriting. "It's my father's." I looked back toward the janitor. "Why didn't you tell us before?" He smiled sadly. "Because he told me not to." "What?" He said one day someone would come asking questions. The old man paused. "If that day ever arrived, give this only to his family." He handed the card to my mother before quietly returning to his work as though nothing had happened. Neither of us moved for nearly a minute. Finally, I whispered, "Do you think whatever they removed from these archives might still exist?" My mother carefully folded the business card and slipped it into her jacket pocket. "I think your grandfather expected this to happen." Less than an hour later, we arrived at the Harbor District. Rows of aging storage warehouses stretched along the waterfront. Rust covered many of the rolling steel doors, and the salty ocean air carried the distant sound of cargo ships entering the harbor. Storage Unit 118 sat near the far end of the complex. Dust covered the lock. It looked untouched for years. The manager confirmed the rental had remained active through automatic payments from a family trust established by my late grandfather. No one had opened it in almost 2 decades. My hands trembled as I unlocked the heavy metal door. It slowly rolled upward. Sunlight reached only a few feet inside. At first, I expected dusty furniture or forgotten family keepsakes. Instead, rows of carefully labeled boxes filled the room from floor to ceiling. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall. Old videotapes occupied another. Several locked fireproof cases rested beneath heavy plastic covers. My mother stepped inside first. She whispered only 4 words. "Oh, Dad knew." I looked around the storage unit in disbelief. This wasn't a forgotten collection of family memories. It looked like someone had spent years preserving evidence. Whatever my grandfather had hidden, it was important enough for someone to erase government records decades later. And suddenly I understood why Victor Langford wanted our bookstore demolished before anyone had the chance to start asking questions. For several long seconds, neither my mother nor I said a word. Dust floated through the narrow beam of sunlight entering storage unit 118 while I slowly turned in place, trying to understand what I was looking at. This wasn't someone's forgotten storage space. It was an archive. Every shelf had been organized with almost obsessive precision. Each cardboard box carried handwritten labels, city council meetings, property transfers, inspection reports, financial records, private correspondence. There were even dates covering nearly 30 years. My grandfather hadn't simply collected memories.
He had documented something.
Something important. My mother carefully opened the nearest box. Inside were dozens of VHS tapes, each marked with a location and a date. She picked one up. City Hall, June 14th, 1998. Another. Planning Commission, closed session. Another. Waterfront redevelopment. I frowned. Why would Grandpa record government meetings? He served on several historical preservation committees. I know that. She slowly shook her head. I don't think that's the whole story. Across the room, I discovered 4 locked metal cabinets. Surprisingly, none of them required keys. Only combination locks. My mother stared at them quietly. I know this. You do. She smiled for the first time all day. Dad used the same 4 numbers for everything. She entered the combination. The lock clicked open immediately. Inside were thick binders protected by waterproof sleeves. I removed one carefully. Every page contained photocopies of contracts, property purchases, engineering assessments, corporate ownership records. Many companies had unfamiliar names. North Harbor Investments, Emerald Civic Holdings, Pacific Renewal Group. Different names, different logos. But something caught my attention. Every company listed the same mailing address,
The same downtown office building.
They're shell companies, I said. My mother looked over my shoulder. So, Victor wasn't buying properties himself. He was hiding behind fake corporations. I continued reading. The purchases stretched back decades, far longer than Victor had publicly operated his business. Then I noticed another name. Edward Langford, Victor's father. The pattern suddenly became clear. This operation hadn't begun with Victor. He had inherited it. My mother slowly sat down on an old wooden chair. So that's why your grandfather kept everything. He knew this would continue. Before I could answer, I noticed several external hard drives packed inside another fireproof case. One carried a handwritten note. If paper disappears, digital survives. My grandfather had anticipated someone trying to destroy physical evidence. I smiled despite everything. He planned for this. My mother nodded. He always planned ahead. As afternoon turned into evening, we carefully sorted everything into categories. Contracts, video recordings, financial ledgers, engineering reports, personal notes. Every hour revealed another disturbing discovery. Entire neighborhoods had been purchased shortly after questionable safety inspections declared buildings dangerous. Independent businesses disappeared. Historic structures vanished. Luxury developments replaced them. The same cycle repeated over and over. Then I found something unexpected. A sealed envelope. Across the front, my grandfather had written only one sentence. For Anastasia. My heartbeat accelerated. I carefully opened it. Inside rested a handwritten letter. If you're reading this, then someone has finally become desperate enough to erase the truth. Don't trust official paperwork. Don't trust sudden inspections. Most importantly, don't assume the newest villain created the oldest crime. Everything has roots. I looked toward my mother. He knew this would happen. She quietly nodded. He probably hoped it never would. Before we could continue reading, a loud metallic crash echoed from outside. Both of us froze. Another sound followed. A vehicle door slamming shut. Then footsteps. Several pairs. Heavy. Purposeful. My mother slowly walked toward the narrow window beside the storage door. She peeked outside. The color drained from her face. Anastasia.
What?
They found us. I carefully looked through the glass. 3 black luxury SUVs had entered the storage facility. Men wearing dark business suits stepped out instead of police uniforms. None of them appeared interested in the neighboring storage units. Every one of them walked directly toward Unit 118. One man spoke into an earpiece. Another pointed toward our door. Then I noticed something strange. None of them carried briefcases. Several carried empty duffel bags. "They're not here to arrest us," I whispered. "They're here to take everything." The first man pounded hard against the metal door. "Open up." Nobody answered. Another strike shook the entire unit. "We know you're inside." My mother quickly grabbed several external hard drives while I stuffed the letter, financial binders, and property records into 2 backpacks. "We can't carry everything," I said. "I know. So, what do we save?" She looked around the room for only a second. "The digital drives." "What about the documents?" "They can burn paper." "They can't erase every backup." A third impact rattled the door. Metal hinges groaned loudly. One more hit might force it open. Then I noticed another exit. Hidden behind stacked filing cabinets was an old loading door leading toward the rear alley. Apparently, my grandfather had chosen the storage unit for more than one reason. We shoved the cabinets aside just enough to squeeze through. Fresh evening air hit my face. Without speaking, we ran. Behind us, the main storage door finally crashed inward. Voices shouted, "They're gone. Find the drives."
Not. Catch them. Not.
Call the police. Only one command. Get the drives. That single sentence confirmed everything. The evidence frightened them far more than we did. We sprinted through narrow service roads behind the warehouses until we reached my rental car several blocks away. Neither of us stopped running until the doors slammed shut behind us. I started the engine immediately. As we pulled away from the harbor district, I checked the rearview mirror. 2 black SUVs accelerated onto the same road. They weren't giving up. Someone with enormous resources wanted my grandfather's evidence destroyed before sunrise. And for the first time since receiving my diagnosis, I completely forgot about my own possible death. Because now another question mattered even more. What exactly had my grandfather uncovered that powerful people were willing to chase us across the city to keep buried? The black SUVs stayed behind us for nearly 20 minutes. Every time I turned onto another street, they followed. I kept checking the rearview mirror while gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers began to ache. "They're still there," I said. My mother remained surprisingly calm. "Don't drive home." I wasn't planning to. "If they know where we live, they'll search every room before sunrise." She was right. I took the next freeway exit and entered the underground parking garage of a crowded shopping center. We left the car on the 3rd level, exited through a different staircase, crossed 2 city blocks on foot, and finally called a taxi. Neither SUV appeared. For the first time since leaving the storage unit, we had disappeared. Instead of returning home, my mother asked the driver to take us somewhere unexpected. A small waterfront hotel. "We stayed here once," she explained quietly. "Who did?" "Your grandfather and I." "When?" "The week before he passed away." I looked at her. "You never told me that." "He made me promise not to." Inside the modest hotel room, we finally emptied the backpacks onto the bed. 4 encrypted hard drives, 3 binders, the handwritten letter, several contracts, and 1 old USB flash drive wrapped inside a small envelope. The label simply read, "If everything else fails." I plugged it into my laptop. The drive required a password. "I don't know it," I admitted. My mother stared at the screen. Then she smiled faintly. "Try your birthday. It won't be that simple. Trust me." I entered my birthday. Access denied. She thought for another moment.
No.
She shook her head. "Try mine." I typed her birthday. The screen unlocked instantly. Dozens of folders appeared. Bank transfers, property acquisitions, internal corporate emails, audio recordings, video files. One folder immediately caught my attention. Confidential audit. Inside were spreadsheets tracing millions of dollars through companies we had never heard of. Money flowed from shell corporations into political campaign funds, consulting firms, engineering offices, and inspection agencies. Everything connected. Someone hadn't simply bribed officials. They had built an entire financial system designed to make corruption appear legal. My phone suddenly rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Miss CO? Yes. My name is Daniel Reeves. I remained silent. I believe your grandfather expected someone in your family would eventually contact me. Every instinct told me to hang up. How did you get this number? He gave it to me years ago. My mother looked up immediately. I put the call on speaker. Daniel continued. If you've opened storage unit 118, then you're already in danger. Neither of us answered. I know about the hard drives. That sentence instantly made my pulse race. Who are you? I demanded. I used to work for Victor Langford. The room became silent. I was his senior financial auditor. You expect me to trust someone who worked for him?
No.
I expect you to verify everything I tell you. He paused before continuing. I discovered accounting irregularities 3 years ago. I traced them. I reported them. And 2 weeks later, I was fired. My mother folded her arms. What kind of irregularities? They weren't irregularities. They were organized financial crimes. Daniel explained that Victor's company secretly controlled dozens of shell corporations scattered across different states. Every corporation purchased historic properties after suspicious inspection reports declared them unsafe. Once demolished, luxury developments generated enormous profits while hiding the original ownership trail. The evidence we had discovered represented only half the story. Daniel possessed the other half. Meet me tomorrow morning, he said.
No.
The answer left my mouth before I could reconsider. I don't know you. You shouldn't. But bring one document. Which one? The engineering report signed by Inspector Harold Benson. I searched through the binders until I located it. I have it. Good. Now search the state's licensing database. Why? Because Harold Benson never became an engineer. The call ended. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. I opened my laptop and searched the public licensing records. Harold Benson existed, but not as an engineer. He had worked as a building maintenance supervisor before retiring. He had never possessed authority to sign structural inspection reports. The document declaring our bookstore unsafe had been impossible from the beginning. Not merely forged. Impossible. The realization sent another chill through me. Victor hadn't relied on small lies. He relied on lies so large that nobody expected anyone to question them. The following morning, after changing hotels twice to avoid being followed, we finally agreed to meet Daniel. The meeting took place inside a quiet public library cafe across the city. Daniel Reeves looked nothing like I expected. He wasn't intimidating. He wasn't arrogant. He looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes, and a worn leather briefcase never left his side. After introducing himself, he immediately placed several folders onto the table. I made copies before they fired me. I opened the first folder. Corporate ownership charts, bank routing information, internal emails. Everything matched the files from my grandfather's archive. Independent evidence. 2 completely separate sources. The same conclusion. Daniel leaned closer. Victor thinks destroying documents will protect him. It won't. He slowly opened the briefcase. Inside rested another encrypted hard drive. I spent 3 years creating backups. He pushed the drive toward me. If something happens to me, make sure this reaches federal investigators. I stared at him. Why trust me? He smiled sadly. Because your grandfather trusted your family. And because you're the only people left who didn't sell. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated. The caller ID displayed my neurologist's office in Vancouver. I stepped away from the table to answer. Miss CO? Yes. We've received additional laboratory results. My heartbeat accelerated. The specialist would like you to return as soon as possible. I swallowed hard. Is it worse? There was a brief pause. I'm sorry. We can't discuss the findings over the phone. The call ended. I slowly lowered the phone. For several moments, I simply stood there, staring through the cafe window. Had my condition deteriorated? Or had something else changed? Behind me, Daniel quietly organized the evidence while my mother watched me with growing concern. The fight against Victor Langford had only become more dangerous. But now another battle, one involving my own life, was about to deliver news that would change everything. I spent the entire flight back to Vancouver preparing myself for the worst. The neurologist's office had refused to explain anything over the phone. Every possibility raced through my mind. Maybe the disease had spread faster than expected. Maybe there were new complications. Maybe I had even less time than before. As the taxi pulled into the hospital entrance, I realized my hands were shaking harder than they had the day of my original diagnosis. The same waiting room, the same hallway, the same consultation room. Only this time, the atmosphere felt different. When Dr. Michael Hart entered the room, he wasn't carrying the solemn expression I remembered. Instead, he looked relieved. He sat down across from me and placed 2 medical files on the desk. "Miss CO," he began carefully. "Before I explain anything, I owe you an apology." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "The diagnosis you received 2 weeks ago was based on the wrong imaging file." I stared at him. "I'm sorry, what?" "There was a patient identification error during image processing." For several seconds, I couldn't process the words. "I don't understand. The MRI we initially reviewed was not yours." The room became completely silent. My heartbeat echoed inside my ears. Dr. Hart opened the second file. "We repeated every scan. We performed additional neurological testing. We reviewed the laboratory results twice." He looked directly at me. "You do not have the terminal condition we originally diagnosed." I blinked.
Once. Twice.
Nothing around me felt real. "So, I'm not dying?"
No.
He smiled gently. "You have a treatable autoimmune neurological disorder. It will require medication and monitoring. But with treatment, your prognosis is excellent." For nearly a minute, I couldn't speak. The tears arrived before words did. During the past 2 weeks, I had accepted death. I had packed away my apartment. I canceled future projects, updated my will, prepared to say goodbye to everyone I loved.
Now.
Every one of those plans disappeared. Dr. Hart quietly apologized again. "Our hospital has already begun an internal investigation. We understand the seriousness of this mistake." I nodded slowly. Oddly enough, I wasn't angry. I was overwhelmed. Life had returned to me so suddenly that I didn't know how to hold it. That evening, instead of celebrating, I booked another flight to Seattle. Victor Langford still believed I was running out of time. He had no idea I intended to spend the rest of my life making sure he never escaped justice. The following afternoon, I reunited with my mother and Daniel inside the hotel. Neither of them knew why I had left. The moment I entered the room, my mother stood. "What did the doctor say?" I looked at both of them. Then I smiled. "I'm staying." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I'm not dying." For a second, nobody moved. Then my mother burst into tears. She crossed the room and hugged me harder than she ever had before. Daniel quietly looked away, giving us the privacy we needed. When my mother finally stepped back, she laughed through her tears. I've never been happier to hear doctors were wrong. Neither had I. But relief lasted only a few minutes. There was still work to do. Daniel spread several folders across the table. "I've been thinking. Victor expects us to hand evidence directly to local authorities, which means he'll have time to interfere. So we don't do that," I replied. He nodded. "We release everything simultaneously." My mother looked at both of us. "To who?" Daniel began making a list. "Federal investigators, the Internal Revenue Service, state prosecutors, historic preservation authorities, national investigative journalists, insurance regulators, independent legal organizations, multiple recipients, multiple states, multiple jurisdictions." If everyone received the evidence at the same time, no single person could quietly bury it. For the next 36 hours, we worked almost without sleep. Every document was scanned. Every financial record was duplicated. Every video recording was copied onto secure drives. Daniel encrypted everything. I organized timelines connecting every fraudulent inspection with the corresponding property purchase. My mother cataloged decades of historical preservation records. The evidence became impossible to dismiss. Late on the second evening, Daniel looked up from his laptop. "It's ready." He pressed one key. Encrypted files began transferring to secure legal servers. A second key. Packages automatically uploaded to investigative news organizations. Another. Federal agencies received complete evidence archives. Then physical copies left through overnight courier services addressed to attorneys in 4 different states. Daniel leaned back in his chair. It can't be stopped now. Meanwhile, across the city, Victor Langford was beginning to realize something had gone terribly wrong. According to one of Daniel's former colleagues, Victor had discovered that confidential financial records were no longer secure. He rushed to corporate headquarters with several senior executives. Security cameras later showed him entering the company's private records room. Minutes afterward, employees reported seeing shredded documents filling dozens of industrial trash containers. Computer servers were disconnected. Hard drives disappeared. Boxes were removed through underground loading docks. Victor wasn't protecting his business anymore. He was destroying evidence. Unfortunately for him, he had started too late. By sunrise, federal agents had already requested emergency search warrants. News organizations had begun verifying the documents. Government auditors compared our files with official financial records. The first public article appeared online shortly after 9 o'clock that morning. Its headline spread across every major news outlet within hours. Historic redevelopment empire faces massive fraud investigation. Victor Langford still hadn't been arrested, but his empire had begun collapsing. He believed he could still control the damage. He didn't realize that one final person, someone who had stood beside him for years, was about to become the witness who would destroy everything he had built. The call came just before sunrise. Daniel looked down at his phone before slowly raising his eyes toward me. "It's happening."
His voice was calm. Too calm.
He answered without putting the call on speaker. For nearly 2 minutes he listened without interrupting. When the call ended, he quietly placed the phone on the table. "They've arrested 3 city officials." My mother inhaled sharply. "And Victor?" "Not yet." A strange silence filled the hotel room. Something still felt unfinished. Victor Langford had spent decades manipulating systems designed to protect people. Men like him rarely surrendered after the first setback. Sure enough, only an hour later every television station carried the same breaking headline. Victor Langford denies all allegations. He appeared outside corporate headquarters wearing another perfectly tailored suit. Surrounded by attorneys and cameras, he confidently declared that every accusation against him was fabricated by disgruntled former employees and competitors. He smiled. He answered questions. He even announced plans to sue multiple news organizations for defamation. Watching him on television, I almost questioned whether justice would actually happen. Then Daniel's phone rang again. This time, he smiled. The dominoes just started falling. Within the hour, federal investigators entered Langford Urban Development's headquarters with court-authorized search warrants. Television helicopters captured agents carrying sealed evidence boxes from the building. Computers, financial records, server equipment, personal files. But the most devastating development came shortly afterward. Victor's own chief financial officer, Richard Calloway, requested immunity negotiations with federal prosecutors. Daniel looked at me. If Richard talks, it's over. By late afternoon, every major news network interrupted regular programming. Richard Calloway had agreed to testify, not because he suddenly developed a conscience, because the evidence was overwhelming. He understood that protecting Victor would only guarantee his own conviction. Instead, he decided to save himself. The testimony lasted several days. Every session revealed another layer of corruption. Richard described how shell corporations had been created solely to disguise property ownership. He explained how fraudulent engineering reports were prepared before inspectors ever visited buildings. He identified officials who accepted payments disguised as consulting fees. He produced offshore banking records, encrypted accounting ledgers, private emails, meeting schedules. Everything matched the evidence my grandfather had preserved years earlier. Nothing contradicted it. Nothing weakened it. Every answer strengthened the case. Then came the moment that mattered most to my family. Richard admitted under oath that Victor had personally ordered the fraudulent safety report declaring my mother's bookstore structurally unsafe. There had never been structural damage. There had never been a legitimate inspection. The demolition order had been manufactured from beginning to end. The courtroom fell silent. For the first time since this nightmare began, the truth wasn't hidden inside storage units or encrypted hard drives. It was part of the official public record. Within weeks, the city formally canceled the demolition order. Independent engineers inspected the bookstore. Their conclusion was simple. The building was safe. Historic preservation protections were immediately restored. Construction barriers disappeared. Police tape came down. For the first time in weeks, my mother unlocked the bookstore's front door. We stepped inside together. The familiar scent of old paper and polished wood greeted us. Nothing had changed. The shelves still stood exactly where they had during my childhood. The reading corner remained untouched. Even the old brass bell above the entrance rang with the same cheerful sound as customers slowly returned. Many weren't there simply to buy books. They wanted to support the woman who had refused to surrender. Months passed. Victor Langford eventually stood trial on multiple federal charges, including conspiracy, racketeering, wire fraud, bribery, obstruction of justice, money laundering, and evidence tampering. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days.
Guilty.
On every major count, the sentence effectively ended both his business empire and his freedom. Federal authorities froze his financial assets. Langford Urban Development entered bankruptcy. Several executives accepted plea agreements. Corrupt public officials resigned or were removed from office. Families who had lost homes and businesses filed successful civil lawsuits, recovering millions of dollars in damages. Entire neighborhoods, once marked for demolition, received permanent historical protection. As for Daniel, he became one of the government's key financial consultants in rebuilding oversight procedures that prevented similar schemes from happening again. His years of silence finally became years of purpose. My mother never expanded her bookstore. She never sold it. She simply reopened every morning, greeted every customer with the same warm smile, and continued believing that stories could change lives. This time, she had proof. As for me, the mistake that convinced me I had only 2 months left forced me to return home before it was too late. If that diagnosis had never happened, I probably would have stayed in Vancouver, buried beneath work, unaware that my family's legacy was about to disappear forever. The doctors gave me my future back. My grandfather gave me the truth. My mother reminded me why both were worth protecting. Today, whenever I unlock the bookstore each morning before she arrives, I often think about how close we came to losing everything. Not because one powerful man was greedy, but because too many ordinary people stopped asking questions. Our family survived because someone, decades earlier, refused to throw away the evidence. And because, when the moment finally arrived, we refused to look away. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. If this journey touched you, surprised you, or reminded you that truth is always worth protecting, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next emotional story. Until next time, take care of yourself and never underestimate the power of one person choosing to do the right thing.